What if I told you that it's very possible that everything you know about audio was a lie? That even professionals with years' experience are just guessing. And there is a chance that we're all wrong about the sounds we hear from specific microphones, meaning that gas you have has all been a waste of money. That's an uncomfortable thought, isn't it? Well, this is awkward then. But before you go spiraling into questioning everything you've ever known, let's back up and test this theory. Remember those videos I did a while back comparing the U87AI versus the NT1, and I was a little devious about it. Well, if you haven't seen the videos, they're a must-watch and should clarify some of what we're talking about here today. Now, while I was researching the concept of those videos, I came across a specific one that was comparing an original U87 to the newer U87AI from Recording Hacks way back in the day. Basically, they played both microphones under different scenarios going back and forth between them. Then a bunch of professional audio engineers took turns talking about the differences. And a couple things jumped out at me while watching this video. First was how the dude kept saying Neumann.
It's the Neumann U87.
What the hell, man?
Also the Neumann U87.
Second, well, they all heard something different.
My impressions were that the old mic, I was hearing much more of the more high end on that one.
Yeah, I felt like the new one almost sounded like it came pre-EQ'd a little bit. Kind of felt like it had this 10K boost.
I felt the mid-range to high-end on the old one sounded just a little either more pronounced or a little bit tinnier.
For me, I felt like there was definitely a bump somewhere in the mid-range section for the newer mic.
I felt more proximity from the new mic.
For the newer mic, it had more of a warmth.
Even diametrically opposed opinions on very specific sounds.
I feel that there's a bump in the bottom that exists on the new one that you described it as mid-range.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about...
And it's really lower
it's
than
low
mid-range.
mid, yeah.
So what, are you talking about like 300 to 500? That's kind of where I was hearing
think
the
I'm
boost.
talking about 60 to 150.
How is that even possible? How can two supposed professional and experts in their field be hearing something completely different from each other? Is this just some overprivileged audio snob just blindly throwing opinions out to sound smart? Or are they actually hearing completely different things? The answer is most likely the latter, though I can't speak for all of them. By the way, I'm going to link that video down below if you want to bathe in all the awkwardness yourself. So in those last videos, we talked a bit about the brain and audio, basically going over the stock EQ we have in our ears along with something called the Fletcher-Munson curve. Now, what that details is how much louder other frequencies need to be so our brains hear them as loud as the frequencies we are already EQ'd to. Basically, it's an explainer on why we favor louder audio. Now, if you want it flushed out more than that, again, go watch the videos. And there's some other theories as well. We're going to go over those in a couple. But what you're going to notice is that the brain is at the center of all of it. And that's because our brains act like a converter, preamp, and EQ all in one. Now, this is also the kind of stuff that audio engineers need to overcome to train their ears, basically flattening that EQ curve we talked about earlier. But let's go back to our brain. Why does it do it? Well, our brain filters out a lot of information that it considers inconsequential for your existence and determines the stuff that is more important to not only hear, but to also see and remember. For example, consider your nose. Every day we see our nose. It's right there. It's in front of us. However, you probably didn't even realize you could see it until I brought it up. And in a few seconds, maybe a minute, you're going to stop seeing your nose. Same thing goes for glasses. However, on the audio side, something very similar happens. Our brains consider the most important frequencies to be the ones where the human voice most predominantly lives, in this EQ curve. But it also decides to X out anything else that might interfere with it as well. So sometimes people are less sensitive to lower frequencies, as well as much higher frequencies, all in an attempt to make voices clearer for the brain. And a lot of the time, those sensitivities may be due to environmental issues, like maybe where you work or even live. In some cases, the brain may filter out complete portions of a frequency range, meaning it will take several attempts for you to open your brain to it, which is why professionals train their ears over time. But your brain isn't just a gate for certain frequencies. It's also doing some real-time equations just to interpret audio, meaning it's deciphering in other ways as well. And this is where your brain can actually really mess with your head. For example, Canadian speech. Now, I'm not talking about, hoser, no way, eh? Out for a rip there, bud. Those are all legit and considered Canadian charm. But not a single Canadian says, a boot. Well, then why do people hear it? And how did this joke even get off the ground? Well, if you want the linguistics behind it, go to this video. But outside of those linguistics, our brains are actually the ones to blame for this phenomenon. Canadians, myself included, are saying things different than your American or other country brain expects. So, when hearing certain phrases, your international brains do some quick mental gymnastics and literally come up with the closest thing to what it thinks it heard just to explain it, which is why you hear a boot. A boot. Now, for everyone looking at me cross-eyed and thinking I'm full of road apples, by the way, look that one up and listen to the album. Pure Canadiana. This is something called the McGurk effect. This video from the BBC perfectly explains how that works on our brain.
Ba, ba, ba.
While this man continually says ba, as in the sheep, they change the video out to make it look like he's saying va.
Ba, ba, ba.
Even though he's saying ba, you will hear va.
Ba, ba, ba.
That is your brain doing its thing. And it's the same reason you hear a boot. Your brain is putting together a puzzle, literally using what information it has at hand to shape the very sound we're hearing, which is pretty cool, no? So let's go back to our supposed professionals. I keep saying that, which is kind of mean. And what they're hearing when listening to the differences between the old U87 and the new U87 AI. And we're going to use some of what we just learned to try to decipher what we heard there. Now, there's a lot of people that do not want to hear this. You see, a lot of audio people condition themselves. They will go into a testing scenario expecting differences, or even for one to sound worse than the other. And when you give your brain an outline like that, it's pretty easy to see how those differences can happen. Each person locked into an opinion by one specific example of something they perceived, either during their test or even before it even began. Bias can do that, and my older videos showed that. Even a respected opinion can create a bias for our brains to follow and pick out, especially when you have a moving EQ in your ears. It's all it takes for our brains to cement those opinions. And something you clearly see from that clip I played earlier.
I feel that there's a bump in the bottom that exists on the new one that you described it as mid-range.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking
And
about...
it's really lower
It's
than
low
mid-range.
mid, yeah.
So what, are you talking about like 300 to 500? That's kind of where
I
it's hearing
think
the
I'm
boost.
talking about 60 to 150.
Each hearing a boost in the lower frequencies, but being miles off in what those frequencies actually were. And they use cop-out words like richness and fullness and so many other words that are meaningless in the mathematical realms of audio. So then what does all of that mean? Do all those mics just sound the same? No, but it does mean that your arguing online about the better sounding microphone is about as useless as a cockroach farm. Our individual perceptions and biases are implicit, which is why we seem to favor audio from an SM7B rather than an SM58, despite them sounding quite similar and being very easy to manipulate into something that sounds fantastic. Guess which one most people choose? And all because our ability to hear is intrinsically linked to all things around us, including our sight and our bias. Cheers, guys. and thanks for watching.